Hello viewers. Bishop Todd Hall stepped into a title so shocking that even his fiercest critics paused to breathe. At 60-something, after decades of admiration, controversy, whispers, and applause, he was elevated to a pope, an honor so loaded with symbolism and power that it shook the very foundation of the church world. And as cameras flashed and social media erupted, a haunting comparison began circulating: Eddie Long. A name that carries brilliance, controversy, tragedy, and warning. And suddenly people wondered, was history repeating itself? But behind the ceremonial robes and headlines, one question rose louder than the rest: how did Todd Hall, one of the most polarizing preachers of our generation, end up with a title that shifts the balance of power in the modern gospel world? And what happens now that every move he makes will be under a microscope? Long before the elevation, before the uproar, before the comparisons, Todd Hall was simply a young preacher with a voice that could slice through the thickest silence. His childhood was marked by church walls, gospel rhythms, and the pressure of expectation. Even as a boy, he carried something people couldn't explain. Teachers called him theatrical. Congregants called him anointed. And Todd believed, deep down, that he was meant for something bigger, though he didn't yet understand the cost. His early ministry years were humble. Small rooms. Modest altars. Crowds that grew one person at a time. But every sermon felt like a performance of the soul. He preached with urgency, danced with charisma, and layered scripture with stories that felt like cinema. Soon enough, whispers began traveling far beyond his local congregation. There was a new preacher rising, one who knew how to command attention, shape atmospheres, and leave people hungry for more. And he didn't rise by accident. Todd Hall was strategic. He built alliances with influential leaders. He attended the right conferences, made the right appearances, said the right words at the right moments. Visibility was not a byproduct, it was a plan. By the time he reached the national stage, he had mastered the art of presence. His sermons went viral. His interviews trended. And his name carried weight in rooms he hadn't even stepped into yet. But behind the applause, the truth was far darker. Every figure who rises too quickly in the gospel world invites suspicion. And Todd Hall was no exception. Critics began questioning his flamboyance, his ambition, his motives. They debated whether the man behind the charisma was driven by calling, or by a hunger for influence. And slowly, an uncomfortable pattern began emerging, one that reminded people of a legendary but complicated figure: Bishop Eddie Long. Eddie Long, the powerhouse preacher whose rise, and horrifying fall, left scars on the faith community. A man whose influence was almost untouchable until it wasn't. And whether fair or not, observers began drawing lines between his path and Todd Hall's. Both charismatic. Both adored. Both ambitious. Both surrounded by power. Both moving in circles where influence multiplies faster than accountability. The murmurs grew louder when Todd Hall began crossing traditional boundaries. He launched big-budget events. He expanded his ministry into mainstream media. He became a brand, polished, visible, influential. Some called it innovative. Others called it dangerous. The more he grew, the more divided the church became, but his network of supporters only strengthened. Behind closed doors, leaders with influence, money, and authority aligned themselves with Hall. Strategically. Quietly. Intentionally. And every handshake, every endorsement, every private meeting pushed him one step closer to something unprecedented. Then came the moment no one saw coming: his elevation to a pope. The ceremony itself was explosive. The attire. The language. The symbolism. Every detail carried weight. Supporters cried. Critics fumed. And the internet detonated within minutes. Some praised him as a visionary willing to push gospel leadership into new territory. Others warned that this was Eddie Long all over again: charisma overshadowing caution, influence overshadowing accountability. But the truth, the real truth, was hidden behind the scenes. Todd Hall's elevation didn't happen overnight. It was the result of years of strategic positioning, powerful alliances, and carefully crafted public perception. He didn't just rise. He climbed, with intention and precision. And while the world watched the ceremony, analysts were watching the power structure forming behind him. Church leaders whispered concerns about unchecked authority, accountability, factions, the creation of a spiritual monarchy. But supporters insisted he was the one leader bold enough to challenge tradition and expand the reach of modern ministry. They claimed his elevation was the dawn of a new era, not a repeat of the past. Yet even as the debate raged, Todd Hall faced his most personal test. With every headline, the weight of leadership pressed harder. How do you walk in a title that half the world celebrates and the other half fears? How do you lead when your legacy is being shaped in real time by people who don't know you behind the pulpit? And what does it mean to carry a mantle that many believe is both honor and warning? In the quiet moments after the ceremony, away from the cameras, away from the noise, some say Todd Hall looked both triumphant and shaken. Because he understood something few leaders ever admit: elevation is not applause, it is responsibility. And responsibility comes with a cost that fame can never soften. Today, his legacy is being written faster than ever. Will his papal title mark the beginning of a new movement? Or will it echo the rise and fall pattern many fear? Only time will tell. But one thing is undeniable: Bishop Todd Hall didn't just step into a new title. He stepped into history.